Good morning and good afternoon. This is Anthony Kaoli, the Regional Director for the Alaska Region Training and Technical Assistance Center. And we are presenting today the Tribal Emergency Preparedness and Tribal Youth National Webinar for the Administration for Native Americans. The Administration for Native Americans has a vision that Native communities are thriving. And ANA's mission is to promote self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects and training and technical assistance to eligible tribes and Native organizations. The Alaska Region Training and Technical Assistance Center is the host for this national webinar today. We have a staff of 4 core people: myself, the Regional Director; Angela Camus, our Training and Technical Assistance Manager; Charles Pill, who's moderating today, our Technology and E-Outreach Manager; and our newest employee, Junior Gisa, who's our Anchorage Outreach Coordinator. So what do we do at the Alaska Region TTA Center? Well, we're contracted by the Administration for Native Americans to support community-based projects in our region, the Alaska region. We provide free training. Our training addresses different areas of project development and administration, including project planning and development, pre-application training, and post-award training. We also provide free technical assistance, and that technical assistance covers the planning phase, the pre-application and application development phase, as well as during the project phase when our grantees are administering their projects, and also preparing for closeout and sustainability of those projects. But in addition to just technical assistance and training, we also have a wide range of tools and resources that each of the regions develop in collaboration with ANA and working together. Our resources are available on anaalaska.org. We've got tools for assessing your capacity, preparing for projects, tools for developing your applications, checklists, a wide range of webinars on different subjects and topics addressing different program areas, including language development, program development. We also host a virtual community. Each region has various social media where we encourage our applicant organizations and grantees to collaborate in a virtual environment, share best practices and resources. In addition to that, there's a national resource data bank or database on the national website, and all of our webinars and tools that we've developed from all the regions are also hosted there. So that's really the best place to go for a comprehensive list of different resources for community-based project development. So as I mentioned, we provide the full project lifecycle technical assistance. We start at the capacity building phase, where we help you to take a look at both your organization's capacity as well as your program's capacity to take on additional functions. And we do that through a combination of technical assistance, tools and resources, and workshops and trainings. We also help you to look beyond the capacity building phase and start on the actual planning and design of your project. And during that phase, we provide project planning and development training. We also can provide, if you're eligible, some technical assistance on project planning and development. And that eligibility depends on whether you've ever received federal funds or not. We have a resource directory and some other reference tools available. Plus we have webinars that deal with the planning and development phases of project development. During the application phase, we offer pre-app training, and our most used technical assistance is the pre-app reviews. So we actually, each region is allotted so many hours to review your draft applications before you actually submit them, and that can be enormously helpful in helping you to strengthen your applications. And for the applications that don't actually get funded, we can also provide a review of those and of the comments with you. If you're awarded funds during the project phase, we provide our post-award training, so that teaches you how to administer your grant, your ANA grant. We can provide technical assistance both on and off-site to help you address any challenges that arise during your project. And then finally, we also look towards sustainability. So we do that in different ways. ANA has it has staff that are focused on doing impact evaluations and actually annually go out to many of the projects and meet with the grantees to discuss how the project went, so that best practices can be learned from those projects, and also a congressional report is generated from that. And okay, as I mentioned before, there's 4 different regional technical assistance centers. We are the Alaska region. We serve the state of Alaska. There's also the western and eastern regions, as well as the Pacific region. And all of the services we provide that I mentioned before, we all provide the same services. So just if you need assistance, reach out to your respective region. We have some upcoming webinars. Food sovereignty is happening on September 24th, and that's being hosted by the Pacific region. Human trafficking will be presented on October 8th, hosted by the Western region. And self-evaluation, which is happening on October 22nd, hosted by the Eastern region. To register for our webinars, go to your regional website, and you can register from there. You can also go to the National ANA website and look at the events and register from there. So today's webinar, our goals are to increase awareness of the need for tribal emergency preparedness. We'll be providing an update on FEMA, a year in review, and we will be looking at resources for tribal youth preparedness, as well as other ANA resources. So those are the goals for today's webinar. Our guest presenters today are Milo Booth, the National Tribal Affairs Advisor, coming to us from Washington, D.C., FEMA, as well as Lynda Zymbrano, the Executive Director for the Northwest Tribal Emergency Management Council, and also the co-founder and Executive Director for the National Tribal Emergency Management Council, coming to us from the state of Washington. So to set the stage, we're just going to talk briefly about the need for preparedness. And one of the issues that we are faced with, particularly in our native communities throughout the United States and even in the Pacific, has been the whole history of relocations, whether they were forced, coerced, or the result of natural disasters. This has been a common theme, and even in the last 100 years. And a good example of that is one that I like to share from our own community of Perryville. As a contractor serving the Administration for Native Americans, we're owned by the community of Perryville through the local Ainska Village Corporation. Perryville is an Alutiiq village located on the Alaska Peninsula, and it has pretty amazing history. In 1912, there was a massive volcanic eruption, Nova Rupta, north, more than 150 miles north of present-day Perryville. That was a cataclysmic event, really, and it was such a large eruption that it completely buried the ancestral home of our tribal members. It was the eruption was 100 times greater than Mount St. Helens, just to put it into perspective. And yeah, our ancestral villages of Katmai and Douglas were completely buried. So our descendants were forced to relocate, and fortunately at the time, Captain Perry with the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service was in the area and rescued the survivors, transported them over to Kodiak Island, where they waited for the ash to settle, and then several days later brought them south to first Ivanhoe Bay and then present-day Perryville. And the stories of that are pretty heart-wrenching and amazing. Just the descriptions of basically the feelings of people as they were leaving, not knowing really where they were going to go, and pretty much having their lives in the hands of Captain Perry as they sought a new home for the survivors. So Perryville was set up as a refugee camp, and we just recently celebrated the 100-year history of that. But as I mentioned before, this is a pretty common occurrence, whether it's natural disasters or more recently coastal erosion and riverine erosion and flooding, particularly in Alaska, is threatening a number of our communities, which have been identified through multiple studies. Right now there's 31 villages that have been identified as facing imminent threats of flooding and erosion. But even villages that aren't identified on this priority list are being affected. And a good example of that is Galena. In 2013, the village of Galena was flooded due to an ice jam. And as a result, about 2/3 of the whole village had to be relocated to different villages in the area, and a lot were relocated to Fairbanks. And this happened quite quickly. This summer has really highlighted the need for our villages and tribes to start to think about preparedness, because we've just had an unprecedented fire season this year. Over 5 million acres have burned, more than 743 fires, and this was early in the season. Multiple villages were threatened. We had several partial evacuations of youth and elders, and this was across the state. Now, this isn't just in Alaska. Even in the lower 48, it's been an issue. This slide here just shows you the before and after. You can see the scarring. On the left is before, on the right is after. You can see the scarring from the over 5 million acres that have burned just this year. But in the lower 48, particularly in Washington State, we have been faced with a number of fires, and even on the Colville Reservation, there's been multiple evacuations. At one point, more than 2,000 dwellings were threatened, and over 1 million acres has been lost to fire this year. So this is just some good reasons why we really have to start thinking about preparedness, and this is a good opportunity to do that. So next we have FEMA. FEMA is going to be providing a year in review, and our guest presenter is Milo Booth, the National Tribal Affairs Advisor. He's got over 18 years of experience working with tribal, state, and federal agencies on land management and energy resource development issues. Some of his past positions include Realty Specialist for the U.S. Forest Service's Lands and Realty Management Program, and also as Tribal Liaison with USDA's Office of Tribal Relations and the Forest Service Office of Tribal Relations. And he is also a tribal member, Alaska Native of Metlakatla Indian Community, where he worked as the Director of Forestry and Land Resources. So Milo, you're just going to have to tell me to advance the slides, because I'm just doing the screen sharing. But go ahead and take it from here, and I'll go to the next slide.
Okay, I'll restart. Thanks again, Anthony, and thanks again, Charles. As noted, I am from Alaska, the Matlacat Landing community, and I always enjoy interacting with whether it's associations, village leaders, or friends and family from that great state. As noted, I am the National Tribal Affairs Advisor here at FEMA, and I've been in this position for about a year and a half. I'm really grateful that you guys have asked me to come back and present on this webinar. For last year, I presented the newly signed Tribal Consultation Policy, and this was the first venue that we used to present in a webinar, and we hosted about 10 of them here at FEMA, but this was the first one with a 3-Star Alliance, and so we felt that was a good kickoff, and happy to be back here. With that, I'll get going. I'm currently joined in my office here by Tanya Stevens and Geralda Calixte, who work here at FEMA in the tribal branch. But with that, I'll go ahead and start on these slides. I like to start with this slide, the FEMA Regional Tribal Liaisons. For, if you look at it, with 10 FEMA regions, we're listed as having tribes in 9 of the 10. However, that's going to change shortly with respects to FEMA Region 3. Well, the Pamunkey Indian Nation is set to get their federal recognition in early October, and we've been working with our branch chiefs out in Region 3 to identify a regional tribal liaison for that region. They've been involved in the last 3 months, and we're looking forward to interacting with the Pamunkeys when they get their federal recognition. So that will give us regional tribal liaisons in all 10 regions and moving our number up to 567 federally recognized tribes. So we're excited about that. As I noted, last year I presented the FEMA Tribal Consultation Policy. Most recently I hosted, or the Western Regional Partnerships hosted a webinar that I presented on back in July. This is still an option for tribes and or tribal associations. If you have any questions about it, just contact me, and I'll be happy to do a presentation on your webinar or work with you to get you the slides and we can talk about it. But I won't get into it too much here. One of the things that we rolled out last October was the Tribal Pocket Guide, and this wasn't something that triggered our consultation policy, given that it is not new information and it wasn't new policy. It's just a collection of existing information. But we did work with the national associations. Lynda Zymbrano's organization, the National Tribal Emergency Management Council, was one of them. But along with the National Congress of American Indians, ITEMA, the Tribal Emergency Management Association, and the United South and Eastern Tribes, they provided comments for us on what they felt was a good collection of information for we wanted our target audience to be tribal leaders and emergency managers who don't have well-defined emergency management operations, so they can take something and look at what is being offered at a federal level, find out what region they're in, who they can contact, things like that. And this has been a big hit. Our initial print run was 7,000 copies, and we distributed them throughout the regions and here at headquarters. And in the last 10 months, we've given away just about 6,000 of them. We're down now in the hundreds, so we're going to need to put in a new order for more pocket guides. So if you have any desire to have any of these, please let me know or let your regional tribal liaison know, and we'd be happy to get them to you. As all of you know, the Stafford Act amendments with the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act allows tribes to seek their own declarations if they so choose. Most of you have probably heard about this based on the pilot declarations guidance, but this was a big step for Indian country. A lot of you probably had lobbying trips on behalf of this, and as you know, this happened prior to me showing up. And how we implemented it, it was implemented immediately after the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act was changed. We did not wait as an agency to implement this based on policy, but we did have to use existing policy. And so, as you know, tribes who are who want to seek their own declarations are currently using the state regulations. This is set to change. As you know, the pilot declarations guidance was put together and put out for consultation last year. It ran basically from March through the end of August, and so a lot of you have given us comments on that. But with the current regulations, there have been 9 tribes have requested 10 major disaster declarations, with 8 of them being granted. With we felt that tribes have taken advantage of this, understanding cost share, what state they're in. Some states pick up full cost share, some do not. But one of the big things that we had recently was the Pine Ridge, the Oglala Sioux out on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation was the first individual assistance declaration that was granted to Native American tribe. That's out in FEMA Region 8. So our regional tribal liaison, Megan Floyd, has been out there basically for the last month working with their leadership. But we are in a pilot period, or we're moving into a pilot period. And again, here are the numbers of the tribes that were awarded. Most recently, the Oglala Sioux tribe of the Pine Ridge Reservation. That, you know, should stand out based on the fact that it was a IA declaration and not a PA, which is public assistance. It was individual assistance. But the total number is 8, and you know, we're very happy, not for all these disasters, but with tribes understanding and taking advantage of the options that they've been given based on the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act. The Tribal Declarations Pilot Guide, again, I mentioned the dates. It basically ran from the early April through the end of August last year. However, it went into development immediately after SREA was signed. It was an extensive effort on behalf of the agency, both from headquarters and our region folks alike. There were over 500 participants from Indian country, representing over 200 tribes. We received well over 1,000 comments, just shy of 1,200, so that took some time to get through the adjudication process, but we did make it through that. Our next step after the adjudication, it was the revision, and what we mean by that, it then gets put into the federal process where it goes through our department. As FEMA, we do sit under the Department of Homeland Security. It then passes from there on to the Office of Management and Budget, and so we're waiting for that federal process to finish. Once it is finished, the tribal leaders will then get another letter of notification for consultation that will come out, and then we will start the process over and then begin the rulemaking. We do interact quite frequently with Indian country. Specifically from headquarters here, we have a standing monthly call with what we consider the big 4 tribal associations. They're the national associations who handle emergency management. There's National Congress of American Indians, United South and Eastern Tribes, the Tribal Emergency Management Association, and the National Tribal Emergency Management Council. We also host concurrently once a month with our regional tribal liaisons a standing call as well, because we want to make sure that we're hearing not only at a national level what the associations are hearing, but what our regional folks are hearing at a regional level. We've had tribes who are very vocal, stating that they want to deal exclusively with their regional tribal liaison when it comes to consultation because they feel very comfortable with them. That was music to my ears. That tells me that our regional tribal liaisons have built up a good relationship with their tribes, and we want the tribes to take advantage of that. We also do regional visits from headquarters. We don't invite ourselves, so to speak, but we do, if the money is available here for our travel allocations at FEMA, I will work those invitations through the regional office and then make sure that both the regions and headquarters are involved. An example of that would be the Montana Indian Nations Working Group. I received an invitation from that earlier this year. I worked it through Acting Regional Administrator Sharon Loper and Regional Tribal Liaison Megan Floyd, and we all attended and had a really good meeting. One of the other big things that we have is the annual Hurricane Preparedness VTC, and this year we had 8 tribes participate. This is where mostly tribes on the East Coast and in the Southeast have the same opportunities as the governor's office from each respective state as hurricane season kicks off the first week of June, to all jump online and test their lines of communication, make sure everything's working, make sure we know who the players are, and we were really pleased with the number of tribal participants. So we do offer training, as most of you may know. You may even have been out to Emmitsburg, Maryland, and attended some courses at the Emergency Management Institute. Those travel costs are reimbursable when you come out here. We do also want to start building awareness for the National Emergency Management Executive Academy. That is a course that's offered at EMI. It's very intensive. It's for tribal leaders who would be on the same level as the senior executive service employees here in the federal government. So if your emergency manager is not that person, please identify one. You can talk to me about it as we roll into fiscal year 16. The application period isn't until the spring, but we want to make sure that tribal leaders are getting the same training as their federal and state counterparts. One thing I would point out is that when we bring our training to Indian country, the travel costs are not reimbursable. But one thing we do hear quite often whenever I'm out interacting with tribes, whether it's at an association meeting or out in Indian country, usually two things. One is bring training to Indian country, because getting out to Emmitsburg, Maryland isn't the easiest thing to do, especially for you folks out on the West Coast, specifically Alaska. It can be a 1 or 2 day operation just to even get out there. So we have heard that, and we've heard it loud and clear. This year we've really put forth a good effort to bring training out to Indian country. The Alaska Village Council Presidents, or the Association of Village Council Presidents, sorry, out in Bethel, Alaska, which represents over 50 tribes, they invited FEMA out, and we went out there in March and provided the L583 series, the Emergency Management for Tribal Leaders short course. A similar approach was put forth a week later at the Tribal Transportation Symposium out in Fairbanks. However, our largest effort was at the United South and Eastern Tribes Mid-Year Conference, which was hosted by the Mashantucket Pequots. We had 84 attendees at a sheltering exercise, and that was the largest course that I had seen in the time that I had been here that had been brought out into Indian country. That was followed up by NCAI and NTEMC respectively. At NCAI, we were on the agenda for the L583 course on the pre-conference agenda. We gave a workshop, if you will, of federal partners that FEMA interacts with. So we had the counterparts in the tribal branch from the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Agriculture, and the American Red Cross all show up, and they interacted with us and talked about their role in emergency response and preparedness. And we felt that that was a really good course for tribal leaders to attend. We also gave an overview of training, and I gave an overview of a year in review. We followed that at the Northwest Tribal Emergency Management Council, or NTEMC's conference. Lynda was there. That was a very well done conference. We provided a year in review. We gave a FEMA 101 session. We had various FEMA programs. You have a presentation there from Grants Preparedness to, I can't recall what else had been there. We brought MERS vehicles from the region. We had the regional administrator. So we were really involved, and we felt that that was a good turnout on behalf of the agency. One thing I would say, too, is if you feel that you need something, whether it's training or awareness brought to your reservation or association, please let me know, and or the regional tribal liaison know. One of the other things that I had mentioned in addition to training was opportunities, specifically with the grant programs. Some of you or all of you may know about the Tribal Homeland Security Grant Program. You can look us up on the web under grants.gov. It's a self-certification effort on behalf of Indian country. There's 104 parameters that you need to check off: 1,000 square miles of Indian country, near a major metropolitan area, near existing critical infrastructure, and within 50 miles of international border. There's $10 million that were made available to tribes, and we awarded those out in July 15th, or I guess the end of July of this year. But we want to build awareness, make sure that you know about these opportunities. And we understand that some of our other grant programs, you have to go through the state. We hear that a lot, but quite frankly, that is set by Congress. We do need you folks to bring that message to your elected officials if it's something that you don't agree with. Again, there's the other opportunity as well, which is either working for us or with us, or taking part in some of our youth programs. There is the FEMA Corps program, which targets the 18 to 24-year-olds. I'd like to point out that that is the same age structure and parameter that the Generation Indigenous folks have used. Whether or not they borrowed that or stole that from us remains to be seen. but it does offer some professional skill development. We put them to work in our regional offices, in headquarters, in JFOs. They learn what emergency management is about, and they actively take part in working in these disasters. You could look us up under the nationalservice.gov. It's managed by the NCCC. There are two types of FEMA Corps program opportunities. One of them is for high school graduates, and feel that's a good program to get into if quite frankly, it puts you out there in the workforce and it gives you some experience. There is the Recent College Graduates program, and that's the Leaders program. Obviously, it's right in the title, so the recent college graduates can apply for it and get a little more of an advanced training. At the end of it's a 10-month program. At the end of the 10 months, we provide a $5,400 stipend that the individual can use to an education of their choice. We don't dictate how that money can be spent, but it is spent for education. We do also, obviously, as a federal agency, we do hire people quite regularly, so please look us up even if it's not a travel-specific job. I will point out that we had a recent hiring of 8 tribal specialists in our reserve program. FEMA reservists, they're basically on-call employees that we use during time of a disaster. Adding the 8 tribal reservists obviously give us a larger pool of tribal folks who are folks who interact in the tribal world on behalf of FEMA. But one thing that really stood out in this is that it puts us right around 30 reservists in the tribal program, but 4 of the 8 recent hires are Native Americans, and so we felt that our message is getting out there in the Indian country that there are opportunities here that you can take part in. Now, obviously, you've probably seen our mission statement here. I will point out the administrator will randomly ask us what this is, whether we're in an elevator or in the food court or just walking in the morning with our cup of coffee. So we do want to put it out there that it's something that we do take quite seriously, literally and figuratively. But with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, please feel free to show my contact information again, and let me know if there's anything that I can do, whether it's putting you in touch with our grants folks, or interacting with your regional tribal liaison, or having us show up and provide some training, or speaking about what types of opportunity we may have here as an agency.
Awesome. Thank you, Milo. I really appreciate that. And that's going to lead us into our next discussion on the Tribal Youth Preparedness Toolkit. But before I go on, I just wanted to mention that one of the tribes that Milo mentioned that had received a disaster declaration, or an approved disaster declaration, was Karuk, and that is actually one of the ANA grantees that focused on emergency preparedness capacity building through the Administration for Native Americans. ANA is within the Administration for Children and Families, so there's a heavy focus on youth, and that's why we're going to be touching on this aspect with Lynda's presentation. Lynda Zymbrano is our next guest speaker, and she is a very busy lady. I'm pleased to have her. I had the opportunity to meet with her at the National Emergency Management Conference, and just a little bit of her background. She's been working with the Northwest Tribal Emergency Management Council since 2004, and then more recently was the co-founder and current executive director for the National Tribal Emergency Management Council. Some previous positions she held is with the Lower Elwha tribe as health director and emergency manager, also as executive director of health and social services with the Snoqualmie tribe. And one thing that really stands out in her resume that I thought was fascinating, it shows how hard she works. When she worked at the Tulalip Police Department, she wrote 93 grants in 36 months. So that tells me that she is extremely hardworking. So Lynda, we're pleased to have you. Lynda's going to talk about the organizations that she's been developing, and then she's going to go into the actual toolkit that she developed. And Lynda, why don't you take it from here?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anthony, for a very kind introduction. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Milo as well and commend FEMA for the participation in this year's National Tribal Emergency Management Council. FEMA truly showed their commitment to Indian country with a strong showing and with the great presentations that they were able to provide for our membership this year. The reason that we pulled together the Northwest Tribal Emergency Management Council to begin with was because we had very few emergency managers in the state of Washington, and that's where the NWTMC was originally born. And when I was with Tulalip, Tulalip had a really strong feeling for the tribes working together. And so we attended that first Homeland Security meeting back in 2004 to discover that there were very few tribes that were actually participating in some of the Homeland Security and emergency management meetings. So we put together a consortium of 8 tribes 12 years ago to work collectively on emergency management. Over the course of the last 12 years in working with those original 8 tribes, we expanded our Northwest Tribal Emergency Management Council to go statewide. And when we did that in 2008, we decided to incorporate to become a 501c3. And as we were reaching out and doing work with tribes throughout Washington, Idaho, and Oregon started to pay attention to some of the things we were doing and asked how they could become a part of the group. So we expanded our charter and bylaws to bring on Oregon and Idaho. And eventually, in 2010, we brought on some of the villages in Alaska and started working with them. Much like in the very first slide that Milo started out with the 10 different regions that FEMA currently designates, we saw that for us anyway in the Pacific Northwest that we were now working with the tribes located in Region 10. So since 2010, we kind of saw ourselves as the tribal overlay to FEMA Region 10. What we wanted to be able to do is expand out into some of the other FEMA regions and share information, share resources, share training, and really more importantly, learn from some of our tribes in the other regions how they were handling their emergency management programs. The best way that we saw that that could happen was under the umbrella of a National Tribal Emergency Management Council. And so that's truly how the concept of NTMC was born, was for the Region 10 tribes to be able to work with the Region 8, the Region 9, all of the other regions across the nation. And we now have signed agreements with more than 350 of the tribes across the nation under these tribal emergency management associations and other tribal associations that are working collectively on emergency management and homeland security. The org chart just demonstrates those different regions and how we see that those different regions will overlay the FEMA regions. What we've also done is we've brought in subject matter experts that align with each of the emergency support functions so that they can advise the board of directors and advise our membership on specific issues that might relate to, for example, emergency support function number 1, transportation. We've started to work with a lot of the different transportation organizations and agencies so that we can better identify where it is that we can strengthen our emergency management and homeland security functions under ESF1. And so by working with our local, state, and federal partners, we've been able to identify issues and bring forth better solutions. So with a lot of the training that we do here in Washington, one of the most successful trainings that we conduct on an annual basis is our tribal CERT program, our Community Emergency Response Team training. And we as an organization take that out to the reservations and work with the individual tribal nations in helping to recruit and train students and provide ongoing opportunities after those trainings are completed. When we first started conducting the training, the majority of our students were adults, but we very quickly identified that many of the adults that were attending were asking if they could bring some of the youth along because they really felt that youth would benefit from taking the training. And of course, we were thrilled that people saw the value of bringing this training to our youth. And so from that, we started to expand into doing specifically youth trainings, in conjunction with some of our tribal nations that conduct summer youth work programs. Some of our summer youth work programs actually mandated that all of the youth that were participating in that program spend a week with us, taking the CERT class and learning about emergency response. FEMA Region 10 became a very strong partner of ours in providing this tribal CERT outreach, and identified very quickly that if there was a best way that we could consolidate all of these materials and resources, and especially our tribal resources that we had identified for presenting in these classes, that it was going to be a very valuable tool that we would again be able to share with other regions outside of Region 10. And so about a year ago, we started working with FEMA Region 10 personnel in collecting all of the materials, resources, avenues for supplies, curriculum that we could find that we were already presenting in the CERT class, but in a way that we could put it all into a tool that we could share with other people and they would be able to utilize. So these next slides that we have in this presentation are to talk a little bit about the timeline and then to share with you specific examples of things that are in the Tribal Youth Preparedness Toolkit. Okay, so when we first came together, we started thinking of different subject matter that we would like to have placed on the toolkit. Here's an example of where we started about a year ago. Again, you see that tribal CERT button there. That's kind of where all of this was born, and that's where we wanted to start from. But as we were talking about the CERT program, we talked about some of the things that we do in conjunction with the CERT, like the flood fighting. We often bring in some of our traditional medicine people, and we talk about some of our local plants and herbs and things that our tribal people already traditionally have used for emergency preparedness or perhaps health-related issues. And so we saw that as a good subject matter to incorporate into our materials. With especially our tribal youth today and the use of Twitter and Facebook and many of the different social media outlets that are available, we thought that it would be a really good idea to also incorporate some of those materials. So you can see some of the way that the development of the subject matter occurred. Okay, so here, the existing modules that we started with are on the left. As we developed the tool over the course of the last 12 months, we had some events that were happening that were current events, like our canoe journey. There has been a strong increase in active shooter events across the United States. We saw opportunities to be able to bring in additional resources into this toolkit. And so my most important message to everybody in this webinar is that we are not at the end of the road and have a complete project with our toolkit. We really feel like we're at the beginning of the road, and we're looking for as many partners as we can to continue to develop this tool. So with that, we are still looking for what topics are missing. We have put out, I believe, close to 400 of these CDs just in our last print, and then I think there was 150 CDs in our first print. In having as many different state and federal partners and as many of our tribes review these toolkits to identify what topics are we missing, what topics would people like to see added, what materials, information, expertise can still be added to the CD. We are also looking at who's interested in test driving the toolkit and who will conduct the workshops at the National Tribal Emergency Management Council to teach people how to use the toolkit. And we see this avenue through the webinar as being one of our very first steps of being able to bring this forward to all of our partners and be able to further develop this toolkit. So for a little bit of a timeline, in January of this year, we had hoped to have a final list of modules for version 2. So this was our second version of the toolkit. The first one, you know, I like to describe the first version versus the second version. If some of you are old enough to remember the very, very early version of Pong, where there were two paddles on the screen and a ball bounced back and forth between the paddle. There's a big difference between where video games started with Pong many years ago versus an Xbox One today. And we really saw our version 1 as being kind of that original Pong game that people used to play, versus our version 2 is moving a little bit closer to an Xbox 360, but we're not quite to Xbox One yet. So we are looking at developing further versions that will incorporate additional subject matter, expertise, and additional resources. As we go through the timeline, you'll see that in March of 2015, we had hoped to finalize a list of subjects that we wanted to go to print with in version 2, so it would be ready for the workshop at the National Tribal Emergency Management Council. I left the timeline in this particular PowerPoint presentation, again, to demonstrate that it's an ongoing project. And as you can see, that the very final date on this particular timeline is September 25th of 2015. It was to finish the analysis on the NTMC workshop's feedback, as well as a final report on Toolkit version 2.0. We want to be able to take all that information and then start developing what the scope of work will look like for version 3. Okay, and this is what the very first screen on the CD looks like. In the center, you can see it says to click to open the toolkit. On the right-hand side, there's safety information. So, for example, with the fire suppression course, we felt that if people were going to be lighting live fires and we were going to be teaching people how to put them out, there might be some very specific safety information that relates to that particular module on the toolkit. So under that safety information button, we have listed as many different safety factors that we could identify that are related to each of the modules on the CD. And the left side, of course, is the purpose of the CD and the acknowledgments of all the really wonderful partners that worked with us on this particular project. And we'll go through these next slides relatively quickly because what we're hoping to do is that we're hoping to generate enough interest that people will contact us and ask us for a copy of the CD, and we will make sure to get those out. And a few of these slides are actually about how to use the CD. We thought about deleting them for the purpose of this presentation, but then after speaking with Anthony, I thought it might be a good idea to leave them in, because if somebody does decide to download this particular PowerPoint, the helpful hints will be there in the PowerPoint in regards to how to use the CD at a later date. As you can see from this slide, there were a lot of partners that worked on this particular project, including the Washington State Department of Health. The United States Army Corps of Engineers was very helpful with our flood fighting. We also tapped into the American Radio Relay League in regards to the ham radio operations, AmeriCorps, American Red Cross, always looking for additional partners to be able to add to this list and content and material to add to the toolkit. Okay, so here again is one of those slides that I was talking about. They're helpful hints and tips for using the toolkit. Again here, I talked a little bit about the safety information. Anywhere in the CD that you see one of these yellow triangles with the exclamation point in it, it indicates that there's one or more parts of that module that might have special considerations, and we've tried to take as much of that information into account as we can and provide that information in the CD. And so here are some of the modules that made it to the final version. And as you can see, there's our CERT program, Social Media and Emergencies. Our ham radio operators provided a lot of information for amateur radio. We've got our traditional medicines, American Red Cross. We have additional opportunities for youth and preparedness. And as we go through a couple more of these slides, you'll see some of the elaborated information in each one of these buttons. So here, what we first talked about when we put the CD was who will be our intended audience and how will they actually use this toolkit. What we wanted to be able to do was provide any tribal youth educator, youth counselor, and even in some instances, some of the tribal youth that have taken our CERT class and have expressed an interest in wanting to put on ongoing CERT courses for tribal youth. And so what we felt would be really helpful for any of those parties that picked up this toolkit and wanted to move forward was to also provide them with information on how to organize the workshop to begin with. And so under this section of the CD, we've provided lots of links, resources, great information on how to organize a workshop. Here we've provided lots of information in regards to how to access and functional needs considerations for incorporation into any workshop that anybody would conduct. So you can see just from there, event accessibility checklists, language guidelines, disability inclusive emergency management resources. There's lots of resources that are available to us in conducting these courses, but I know that when we first got started, we weren't even sure where to look for them. And so what we've tried to do is consolidate all of that information right here on the CD so people will be able to find it very quickly. Amateur radio in emergency preparedness. As you can see here, we've got a couple of different bullets. We've got the amateur radio teen talking points. We've got some additional ham radio resources that we were able to find that are very specific to this particular age group. And so by clicking on any one of those buttons, it will bring you into that particular material. Again here, the Adventures of Zach and Max comic books. You saw that button on the previous slide. And what we did was we went ahead and gave you a snapshot that when you clicked on that, this is what comes up. And then again, you can click on either one of those buttons and it'll take you into the resource or the material that's been found. And Anthony, what we can do at this point in time, if it's all right with you, let's just very slowly scroll through the next maybe 7 or 10 slides. Again, American Red Cross Youth Preparedness Programs. American Red Cross has a lot of really great materials. We incorporate a lot of the materials that they use into our tribal CERT program. And so we wanted to make sure to share those resources and acknowledge the American Red Cross for their contribution to our CD. And again here, this is just clicking on to some of the tabs and they're expanding and showing you some of the materials that the American Red Cross has prepared and some of the materials we've incorporated into our training. The Pillowcase Project is a new project that the American Red Cross has been working on. And it's one of the ongoing projects that we provide to tribal youth following their CERT class. It gives them another opportunity to get involved and be able to proceed forward with more emergency management activities. Okay, let's keep going, Anthony. We'll move through a couple more of these. In regards to the Community Emergency Response Team, our training is very specific to our tribal nations and to our tribal youth when we teach these classes with our membership here in the Pacific Northwest. And so what we've done through this section is tried to find some materials like the Tribal Teen CERT Train the Trainer Guide and the Instructor Guide for Teen CERT. We've tried to find materials that are very specific to our tribal nations and then incorporate those resources into this section of the CD. So we can go through the next couple of slides that cover CERT. Here are the different modules that we teach in the CERT unit, the CERT class. And so you can see there's disaster preparedness, fire safety, disaster medical operations. We do some light search and rescue. We teach CERT organization, disaster psychology, and terrorism and CERT. And under each one of these units, a person can click on them. They can teach the individual module all by itself, or they can take all of those modules and put them together in a full CERT class. In working with the Army Corps of Engineers, we also identified all of the flood fighting techniques and materials and resources to teach a flood fighting class. And so we've incorporated all of that into the CD as well. Here we've provided some ongoing opportunities for youth in emergency preparedness. And so again, incorporating the CERT brochure, we've put some links in regards to some of the trainings that we've done. On the far left, the Kalispell CERT training news clip video. They had the local news channel come out and video their CERT class, and it was very well done, and we felt it was really important that we were able to share that with all of our other tribal partners. We also do a lot of work with public health. We work with our American Indian Health Commission, our North Portland Area Indian Health Board, as well as our Washington, Oregon, and Idaho State Departments of Health. We've developed a lot of tribal-specific materials and resources that are specifically dedicated to the public health realm. And because we wanted to be able to share a lot of those resources, we developed this particular section of the CD. There's lots of materials that are listed there, and under every one of those tabs, you'll find additional resources that the tribes themselves or in conjunction with our local, state, and federal partners, the tribes have worked with in developing resources. They can be found here. We've also gone into different aspects of emergency management, like reducing hazard damage, and found resources that are very specific to subject matter outside of the standard CERT class or outside of the standard flood fighting class. All very important materials that can be added to a class, materials that can be distributed during a class, but we want to make sure that we had as many of those types of resources on the CD as well, and so you'll see some of those in the next few slides. Social media, again, Facebook, Twitter, so many avenues that our tribal youth are using these days, and so we wanted to put some safety information on the CD, as well as be able to identify some of the resources that are available, like the earthquake notification programs, the National Weather Service apps that are available on our smartphones these days. But to be able to identify a lot of those types of resources, we have found that our tribal youth love to download this kind of stuff and have these apps on their phones. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we have the great pleasure of working with the Northwest Indian College here. And our college has been amazing in regards to developing a very strong traditional medicines program. And they often come to our conference each year and they share really fantastic information with us. And we saw this as another opportunity to be able to capture a lot of the information that they share and get it into the CD. So again, this slide is dedicated to the Northwest Indian College and all of the work that they have done with us. And we're proud to be partnered with them and be able to share this information with other tribal partners. So here are some additional resources outside of the work that we currently conduct. There's almost an activity book or a coloring book or a preparedness video that's been prepared by almost every federal agency that I can think of. And what we have tried to do is go out and identify a lot of those links, a lot of those resources from federal and state partners, and incorporate some of those materials into the CD. So here again, lots of additional resources that any youth counselor or a youth instructor could go in and find and be able to use for the delivery of a class. And here are just some examples of some of the things that are out there. This one's in a preparedness activity book. America's Prepareathon. We did conduct a lot of this work in conjunction with FEMA, and FEMA has a strong push for America's Prepareathon, and they produce some of the best materials out there, and we wanted to make sure to be able to incorporate all of those types of documents into the CD as well. And so here you would be able to click on any of these modules and be able to print out some of the documentation that FEMA has prepared for America's Prepareathon. Here is an area that was slow in coming, but it finally did catch up with all of the other preparedness activities, and that's animal preparedness. We want to make sure people don't forget about that, and so we've made sure to get as many resources into the CD regarding animal preparedness as well. This is another one of the resources that we found that engaged even a younger group than our teens, going all the way down to the first grade. And so we went ahead and incorporated some of those materials in the CD, perhaps looking toward the future in regards to another CD that would be geared towards our younger generation. And there's some more materials. This is a collection of very specific preparedness videos in which all of these materials have been produced by Indian country, by our tribes, by our member tribes of the NWTMC. We really wanted the opportunity to be able to share some of these resources, and we found that developing this tab and being able to put this section on the CD was a very good way to do that. And here's just another helpful hint.
How can people access or obtain a copy of the DVD or CD that you offer?
They can send me an email at Lynda, Lynda, at ntemc.org or at Lynda@nwtmc.org. Or they can send me a written request, and all of our information in regards to contact information and addresses can be found on our website at nwtemc.org.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. That's a phenomenal tool that that's been developed and has a lot of potential for further development, not only in the Pacific Northwest but nationally. So what we're going to cover next is we're going to briefly, we're focusing on some non-ANA resources. Initially, we heard from Milo about the Tribal Homeland Security Grant Program. FEMA has many other programs and resources for tribes, and also tribes can apply through the states. But we also wanted to talk a little bit about some of ANA's resources that are available. And what I've done here is ANA has several programs. I've just keyed in on some of the program areas that speak specifically to emergency management and emergency management preparedness. So ANA serves Native Americans, including federally recognized tribes, American Indian and Alaska Native organizations, Native Hawaiian organizations, and Native populations throughout the Pacific Basin. Our funding categories are social and economic development strategies, language, and environmental regulatory enhancement. And within the SEDS category, we've got the National SEDS program and the Alaska SEDS program that are typically, or that some of our tribes and Native organizations are tapping into for emergency-related projects. The SEEDS program is more focused on employment and economic development. There are opportunities for first responders that could potentially be used to train first responders if it's creating those positions. I'm not going to talk about the language program area, but I will touch lightly on the ERE program area. So for the national SEDS, and both the national SEDS and the Alaska SEDS are similar. There's just a few slight differences. The national SEDS purpose is to promote the economic and social self-sufficiency for American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians, as well as Native Pacific Islanders. For these types of projects, which are all community-based, ANA is interested in supporting community-driven projects that are designed to grow local economies, increase capacity of tribal governments, strengthen families, preserve Native cultures, and increase self-sufficiency and community well-being. Within the SEDS program, both the national and the Alaska one, there's 3 areas of program interest: social development, economic development, and governance. And ANA and the FOAs provide some sample purpose areas within each of those that can give you an indication of the types of projects that they have or that they will fund. I'm not going to cover every purpose area, but like I said, just the ones that are related to emergency preparedness. So within the National SEDS program and the Alaska SEDS program, under governance, emergency preparedness is a purpose area that is addressed in the FOAs, and that addresses planning and coordinating emergency response services within the community and with state and local governments to protect against the acts of nature and other catastrophic events. So I mentioned that the Karuk tribe was a previous grantee, and they did apply under the National SEDS program for an emergency capacity building project. For the national SEDS, the award ceiling is $400,000 and the floor is $100,000, and the projects can run anywhere from 1 year to 2 years to 3 years, so 12 to 36 months. Now, recently, the Administration for Native Americans reopened up the Alaska SEDS, and this is specific for Alaska. It's basically the same as the national SEDS as far as the program areas. There's just a few minor nuances. Number one, the eligibility requirement is that, of course, the organization has to be serving Alaska Native organizations. It's targeted more for some of our, for the villages and for village projects. There's a few unique areas that was included in the recent FOA. For example, rescue archaeology. It's not typically an area of emergency preparedness or management that is commonly addressed. It's unique to tribes, particularly like in Alaska, when you consider the Exxon Valdez oil spill and the loss of cultural resources, or more recently, due to coastal erosion, the loss of artifacts along the coast that are basically eroding away. Those are priorities for tribes, and that's been addressed in the FOA. Also, emergency preparedness, just like the national SEDS, is a purpose area under governance. And another one that was added within the Alaska SEDS FOA is adaptation and mitigation of impacts of climate change. So the main difference as far as funding is for the Alaska SEDS, the award ceiling is $200,000 and the award floor is $50,000. These are also projects that can last up to 3 years, 36 months. I'm going to briefly touch on the Environmental Regulatory Enhancement Program. We don't have too many of these funded, or too many ERE projects. We have a few in Alaska that are doing some baseline studies, and the focus of the program is to provide funding for the costs of planning, developing, and implementing programs designed to improve the capability of tribal governing bodies to regulate an environmental quality pursuant to federal and tribal environmental laws. So where this comes into play as far as emergency preparedness is more on the environmental response. We have a lot of large-scale industrial development happening, not only in Alaska, but throughout the country. And tribes are tapping into this to, like I said, do some baseline studies, develop their environmental regulatory programs, and potentially some of their environmental response. So it can cover baseline conditions for regulatory purposes, technical and program capacity building for the tribe to perform essential environmental functions. And the terms of this, the ERE grants, is up to $300,000 per year. The floor is $100,000, and it's up to 3 years. So those are just some of the funding sources or resources that are available through ANA, and I'm just going to give a couple of examples of, real briefly, of actual projects that were funded. ANA's grantee portfolio, or grants portfolio, is vast. It covers the entire lower 48, Alaska, as well as the Pacific. And in certain circumstances, ANA has provided emergency SEDS funding to respond to specific incidents or emergencies, such as the California wildfires, Hurricanes Ike and Gustav, and the tsunami in American Samoa in 2009. The Karuk tribe I mentioned earlier received funds, and their grant has closed out, and they focus specifically on emergency preparedness and response. Their goal was to increase tribal capacity and functionality in their preparedness and response. And some of the things that they did, some of their objectives included creating and staffing an emergency services department, completing their NIMS training, developing their GIS capabilities, their HAZUS CPR and first aid trainings, as well as adopting a fully revised emergency operations plan, and developing geospatial database and maps of key infrastructure and data layers for their emergency operations center. Another project that has been funded on an emergency basis in response to flooding in Galena in 2013 was an award to the Loudoun Tribal Council. This is Galena before the flood and Galena after, and it was a result of basically a damming of there was an ice jam, and it flooded the community, and it flooded areas of the community that weren't anticipated to be flooded, including the new town. The evacuation road to the airport, or the evacuation road that was built, actually got flooded. These are just some photos, and this is New Galena. Excuse me. So one of the things that this project highlighted was a lack of preparedness and a lack of continuity of operations planning, which is a pretty common issue for many of our villages in Alaska. I don't know in terms of the lower 48 the extent to which that is also a challenge, but in the case of Galena Loudoun Tribal Council, although some of their physical records were brought upstairs routinely when during the spring breakup, this flood happened quickly, and a lot of their data was lost downstairs. So this grant is basically helping to rebuild and do some forensic accounting for the tribe, and also to restore some of their IT, put in place some IT, and help them recover from this devastating event. And I mentioned earlier that a large percentage of the community was evacuated to Fairbanks. Several of the people have not returned and remained in Fairbanks. So it's had a lot of social implications on the community. But the ANA funding was critical for the tribe to start that tribal recovery process. So that is that's a quick overview of our ANA resources, and I have a quick question for Milo, and then we'll take a couple of questions before we wrap up. I know we've gone over, and I appreciate everybody's patience. Milo, on the Tribal Homeland Security Grant, you mentioned the eligibility required a certain land base. Has that been an issue for landless tribes?
If it has, they haven't voiced that concern. And what Anthony is mentioning, for those of you listening, is one of the parameters that you don't need to meet all four. It's just one of the four, and it's 1,000 square miles of Indian country. That's a rather large area, you would think. I don't know the exact acreage that would encompass, but it for some of the smaller tribes, they wouldn't be able to meet that. Therefore, I would recommend they would look at the other three parameters. Are they near critical infrastructure? Are they near a border? Are they near a major metropolitan area? But that question has not been brought up.
Okay. Thank you, Milo. Some of our villages are more than 400 miles away from the nearest large city. So, Charles, have we gotten any other questions? I'm looking in the chat box. We'll stand by for a couple minutes or a minute here to see if we got any other questions. If you got a question, please type it in the chat box. We will make the whole presentation available once we make it 508 compliant. That'll be hosted on our ANAalaska.org website, the national ANA website, and also in our YouTube channel. Again, I'd like to thank our presenters today, Milo Booth, the National Tribal Affairs Advisor from FEMA, our guests with FEMA that were participating in the background, and we had one representative from the Administration for Native Americans participating in the background. Lynda, Zymbrano, you've been extremely busy. Thank you for pulling this off. I know you probably haven't had a break for most of the summer, and so thanks for getting me everything. I don't see any other questions, so we're going to go ahead and send out the evaluation. We look forward to serving our tribes and our Native organizations and strengthening preparedness throughout our Native communities. As I highlighted in the beginning, it's a huge issue for us, and it's increasingly becoming an issue. We need to be prepared. So I hope that this will start to pave the way for providing more resources and tools for tribes and Native organizations to strengthen your preparedness. And especially our tribal youth and Native youth, I think Lynda's work and FEMA's support of that and participation in that has really has been phenomenal, and we look forward to seeing that continue to be developed. With that, I'll say Guyana Chuknuk, thank you very much to all our participants, and I'm going to be signing off here, and I guess that's it. Thank you.